Raider, that's a big addition, but it might have had some unintended consequences as Mylik Wilson hits the portal. We're going to talk about both the addition and the subtraction coming up on today's Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Texas Tech, a member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Be sure that you are subscribed to our channel if you have not already. I'm Ryan Mainville. He's Emery Lida. Today we've got some movement at the guard spot in Texas Tech basketball, and so we've got to talk about it. Let's kick things off with Devion Harmon, pretty much the worst kept secret in college basketball for what felt like a couple of months, what was really like a few weeks. Seemed to be some sort of departure coming for him from Oregon after playing one season there. And Texas Tech was in contact with him, had some special permissions granted to be able to do that before he officially hit the portal. Then he officially hit the portal, started having some conversations with Mark Adams and some of the other coaches, and his recruitment was very short-lived. He was announced as a Red Raider, and when you're looking at this roster, especially now, when you're seeing that you're going to be losing Kevin McCullough and Terrence Shannon Jr., this is a pretty big pickup, and it's a pretty important one.
Yeah, you're adding a guy in Devion Harmon that now has more games played in the Big 12 than anyone else on your roster. So, in some sense, getting a guy with as much experience starting games as what Harmon has is going to be really important. I mean, obviously, you look back at his time at Oklahoma Tech, played him 4 different times there. And, obviously, he's a guard with some strengths and weaknesses at the time. I think his shot wasn't quite as developed as what we saw at Oregon. And just in general, he's a player that you're going to want to have around you, someone that can handle the ball well. He can shoot the ball well. We've seen that now for a couple of seasons where he's been above 33%. And he's obviously got a good amount of burst for a guard. I think that's something that Tech might have been lacking last year. And certainly to have a dependable guard on the roster, you didn't really have that with obviously Lamar Washington or Pop Isaacs coming in. Both of those guys are freshmen. You don't really know what you have there. So just in general, having a guy like Harmon to come in that has all the college experience playing high major basketball as he does, it's really nice. And not only does it add to the experience, but also just from a player standpoint, he adds the ability to shoot. He's a primary ball handler that can hit pull-up jumpers. He can get to the lane. The finishing's kind of come and gone over the course of his college career. We mentioned that on a previous podcast that he's kind of had his struggles at times finishing at the rim, but he's also had that be a strong suit at times. So he's just got a lot of versatility to his game, and just having him on the roster, I think, is going to help out a lot and kind of plugs a bit of a hole that you might have had in terms of just having a deficiency in ball handlers without McCullough, without Arms, and without Warren coming back.
Yeah, well, he's a really exciting guy in terms of what he provides for this team, because I think a lot of Texas Tech fans stomached the agony of lack of guard play last season for the most part, and it was hard to watch at times. And this is a guy who obviously can create his own shot. He can get to the basket. Maybe not a traditional point guard in the way that I think a lot of people would think about it, but a guy that is more than comfortable having the ball in his hands and really just generating the team offense. And I mean, we could sit here and we could talk about the importance of his experience alone, because he is transferring into Texas Tech with the second most minutes played, I believe, to any Texas Tech transfer ever. And the only one that had more was Bryson Williams. And when you go and you look at guys in college basketball who since 2019 to last year have played over 2,700 minutes, have a field goal percentage over 42, a three-point percentage over 34, and a free throw percentage over 72. It's not an exclusive list. There's 44 guys on it, but some of the names I think will really, really intrigue some Texas Tech fans. We've got Max Abesmith, Colin Gillespie, Brady Manick, um, Ron Harper, Christian Braun, and then Bryson Williams, Justin Bean, and of course Devion Harmon. So a guy that's experienced and then a guy that's really familiar at playing at a high level and scoring at an efficient clip.
Well, first off, I think you had to get the Justin Bean mention out of this podcast. It's been a little while, so good to hear that he ends up in that query. But certainly, I mean, Harmon's a guy that has just so many different aspects of his game, but I feel like you're going to be valuable when it comes to having a reliable guard. Like if you look at the things that Tech struggled with last year, you could say the guards were generally negative 3-point shooters, with the exception of at times Adonis Arms and Kevin McCullough had their moments. Obviously, whatever you want to classify TJ Shannon, but his late spurt as a 3-point shooter came mostly as a spot up guy. And so Harmon adds in that pull up ability. He's got the burst that I feel like McCullough and to some degree Devion Warren kind of lacked. And obviously Adonis Arms had that burst, but he also compounded that with a little bit out of controlness. I don't really have that same level of concern with Devion Harmon. He's played enough minutes as a high level and as a ball handler to where I trust that he's going to be under control and composed. And then you add in his defensive ability. He reminds me a lot of kind of your prototypical Baylor guard in that he's someone that is a plus shooter. He can get to the lane effectively. He's never really been a primary ball handler, but has kind of been a complementary guard in that he can handle the ball. He's not just merely a shooting guard. And defensively, he's a hard-nosed on-ball defender that can really kind of be disruptive and certainly not necessarily as pesky as some of the other guys like a Mylik Wilson or like a Kevin McCullough, but he's more than competent as an on-ball defender. So he has that on-ball defensive ability, positive shooter, good burst, can finish at the lane, can create for others. Just a well-rounded guard that I feel like Tech hasn't had in a couple of years, and I really think is going to be a good addition to this team.
And the exciting thing too is that there's no adjustment period. The guy that's been playing Power 5 basketball for 91 games now. He's been here. He's done this. He's played 2 seasons in the Big 12. He knows what it's like. He understands the athleticism and physical nature that the Big 12 contains. And it's really hard not to be optimistic about what this guy can do because he's already proven it at such a high level. And I love the way that you kind of threw out that Baylor guard comp. I mean, plus year last year, far his year, 37% from deep on 4 attempts per game. Texas Tech would take that in a heartbeat. That is something that they sorely missed last year. He's a proven free throw shooter, a pretty decent rebounder for his size. I think he's 6'2". He feels like he's still got a little bit of room for improvement there if he can kind of just go down and bang around if that's something he wants to do. I think he could have kind of a Kyler Edwards junior year jump if that's something he wants to do. And then he's almost got a 1.4 assist to turnover ratio in his career. Again, not a guy that's going to average very much assists. You look at his career lines, 2 assists per game his freshman and sophomore year, and then 2.1 his junior year. I think he is who he is on that side of the ball at this point, but that is more than okay for Texas Tech to just have a guy that's a plus playmaker.
Yeah, and the experience is one thing that I want to come back here to kind of close out my thoughts on Harmon, in the sense that when you look at Tech's roster the last few years, it's hard to find guys that have come into the season with 91 career games at a high major level. I mean, obviously Bryson Williams, Kevin O'Banner, Devion Warren, all of those guys had similar levels of college experience, but they weren't at nearly the same level. Obviously, you had guys like Mac McClung come in as a high major transfer, but he didn't have that amount of games. And then internally, something that I mentioned on the Mylik Wilson transfer, which we'll get into in a minute, is that Tech is guaranteed to go 8 years without having a 4-year player in their program. So really the last guard that you saw come through Tech and enter a season with 90 high major games under their belt was Keenan Evans. And that was 5 seasons ago at this point. Like, that's pretty incredible. And obviously I don't want to compare Harmon to Keenan Evans as a player. I think certainly if you look at 3 years of Devion Harmon versus the first 3 years of Keenan Evans, there's not a whole lot of difference from a statistical resume standpoint. I think it's pretty clear Keenan was probably a little bit better of a player, and certainly they have their different strengths. But in terms of like accomplishments and the amount of sort of experience they have playing heavy minutes, like this is something that you rarely see coming into a season, and certainly a Tech is something you haven't seen in a while. So to get a guy with the level of experience with Harmon on board and someone that has played that many high leverage moments and has played in so many important competitive games, that's a big plus to have. And I think it's the biggest thing that I look forward to with Devion Harmon coming on.
Yeah, and Harmon, he's a big pickup, and Texas Tech will certainly need him on the offensive and defensive ends. But unfortunately, it looks like it might have pushed somebody out of the program. We're going to go into depth on our thoughts on the Mylik Wilson departure, but first, a quick word from Built Bar. Summer is coming, and with summer, you're going to need some food on the go. Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on family vacations. Throw them in your bags, in your kid's backpack. Make sure that everyone has a bar so you are fueled for your summer adventures. The best part about Built Bars, they're healthy and delicious. No more sacrificing delicious food for health. With Built Bar, you can have both, and it's easy. All you have to do is go to built.com and order now. Built has a ton of good flavors like banana cream pie, raspberry, double chocolate, and so many more. They are all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at builtbar.com. Thanks again for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Just took a look at Devion Harmon, who's coming into the program, but unfortunately, one of our favorite players from last year's Texas Tech team will no longer be a Red Raider, and that is Mylik Wilson. You look at the stat profile and you just look at the raw numbers, and it's easy to, think that this might not be a huge loss. 15.2 minutes per game, 2.5 points per game, 1.7 assists, 1.2 steals, 1.7 boards. Not a lot to like there. But when you turn on the film, Mylik Wilson is a special defender, elite level to say the least. And we're going to talk about it in our next segment about why this kind of makes sense. But this is a painful loss. Our fandom and our appreciation for Mylik Wilson aside.
Yeah, this offseason has been brutal for the Locked On Texas Tech Hive developments. I mean, we both obviously love Buzo. I'm a huge Clemson only guy. Sounds like he's not coming back. Mylik Wilson is someone that we both really love based off of the tape, and it's just sad to see him go. That's the first part of it, is the personal sentimental value. I mean, I really was looking forward to seeing what Mylik Wilson could do this upcoming year. But on the same token, I think that it's just important to note that there's a lot that Mylik Wilson brings to the table on the defensive end that people seem to overlook. Obviously, got the on-ball disruption. He's certainly someone that can create a lot of steals, can be a real pest on the ball. Off the ball, he makes really quick rotations. He's a lightning quick processor, and that allows him. People look at his shot blocking numbers, but I think that stems from just his ability to rotate so quickly, and time plays up so well. And you add in kind of the cerebral ability. He's a good communicator. He can do all of these things defensively. He's got obviously the physical attributes. He's very lengthy. He's got really good quick twitch and his ability to kind of change direction fast. So you've got all of the abilities that he has defensively. Offensively, work in progress, certainly. That's something that it kind of is what he is. The shot is definitely not there to the degree I think a lot of people were hoping for. Only took 12 threes last season. Only made 4 total jump shots, including mid-range. But the defense, man, it sucks to be losing that. It really does, because you're not going to find a player that's as good defensively as Mylik Wilson. I don't care how good Mark Adams' system is, how much it seems like it's plug or play. There's a difference between guys that are just simply good defenders and guys that are literally top 3 in the nation from a rate stat standpoint. And per minute standpoint and from a BPM standpoint. So losing Wilson sucks on the defensive end, but I guess it is what it is.
Speaking of a tough, even just season, remember the Dark Car, man?
Oh God, that seems like 3 years ago at this point.
Man, Sardar Calhoun, what could have been
Got derailed so fast.
if he had made a single jump shot. That's all I needed to do. But Mylik Wilson, man, I think you explained it well. The defensive ability speaks for itself, and the numbers that he put up in terms of a rate stat standpoint are absurd. The efficiency and the ability that he played on the defensive end when he was on the court was extraordinary, like something that college basketball has not seen in a couple of years. And I'm not over exaggerating. Like I've tweeted about this a couple of times, and I would read the stats that I tweeted, but I don't have access to my account right now. But just in terms of the way that he disrupted plays and provided box score impact on the defensive end was really rare. And to lose that, it hurts, you know. But I feel like you explained it well in terms of the fact that the offense was a work in process, and he just was not going to have the flexibility to kind of work through the kinks that he had at Louisiana. I mean, you look at his usage at Louisiana a year before, and it was at 21.4%. It gets to Tech, and it's down to 11.8. So you just don't really have the opportunities to play through him, which is a bummer for him because I don't think that it gives him the chance to kind of work through some of those offensive issues. But at the same time, it's understandable. And you can't tailor your offense around one guy at a high level program just to make it excusable for him to be on the court on defense. But the portal is kind of interesting, and we've had so many like episodes where we're talking about frustrating additions to the transfer portal. I'm really excited to see what the list of suitors looks like for Mylik Wilson. Like, I feel like he's a guy whose defensive abilities can draw high level program interest, and he's going to have no shortage of interest if you know programs turn on the tape. But I could also see him, you know, ending up at the Bonnies or like some Big East school and just doing his thing, man. And so I'm excited to kind of follow his recruitment throughout this offseason and just see where he lands, because I think he's going to be a good player no matter what his role is next year.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I think that depending on the program that he ends up with and the amount of sort of freedom they give him and sort of the defensive system they run, you could be talking about Mylik Wilson as putting up one of the best defensive seasons we've seen since a guy like Matisse Thybulle or Briante Weber came to town. I don't think that's hyperbole to say, because the ability that he showed at Tech and the defensive ability in both on the ball and off the ball was ridiculous. And certainly offensively, he's a very flawed player. He can't shoot very well. He can't really finish at an elite level. Certainly, he's got okay burst, and his playmaking, I feel like, got overlooked at times, but certainly not someone that you're going to be wanting to give heavy minutes to as a primary ball handler, giving those shooting deficiencies. So it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up, because I could see a really good program kind of taking a little bit of a shot on him, because if the offense improves a little bit, you know, defensively, you're not going to have anyone on the roster that's better than Mylik Wilson. And you know that if you can find a way to fit him in offensively and you can find a way to kind of mask some of his deficiencies, then you have a really impactful defensive player that you can be adding late in the offseason that can kind of play alongside any sort of lineup, really, and sort of be able to play well, because he's that good with on and off the ball. So there's value there. Or you could see him going to a little bit of a lesser program, kind of being the main guy, playing a lot of minutes. Certainly offensively, I don't think regardless of the level he plays that his numbers are going to jump off the page. But defensively, he could put up some absolutely monster stats in the A10 or in a conference of that stature, just because of his ability to be so aggressive and read plays so well. I think that statistically, he's going to be one of the best defenders in the nation if he gets enough minutes. And from a pure tape standpoint, I would say that it backs that up as well. So there's a couple different approaches to that. I'm interested to see where he ends up. I certainly could see it going either way. And regardless, whoever gets Mylik Wilson is going to have a really good addition to the program.
Imagine him at like Tennessee, man. That would be pretty gnarly.
Oh God, alongside the 5'9" dude they have,
Yeah.
what's it, is Ziegler or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that those two would make for one of the peskiest on-ball duos in the nation that I can remember.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that they're on Tech's non-con schedule for next year, so why not,
Thankfully,
Mylik Wilson? Do
that
whatever
might
you want. We're
that
here
might be
for
a
it.
that might be a 40-36 type of game if that ever happens.
We hope so.
Well, we almost witnessed it last year, anyways. So yeah,
All right. Well, sometimes the breakups are mutual. Was this one? Well, we'll give our thoughts. But first, want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and phones in your pocket. You're going to save time and money when you use Rock Auto. Rock Auto is also a family business serving do it yourself customers for over 20 years. Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every customer. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, locked on in there. How did you hear about us box so they know we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. All right, so by all accounts, Mylik Wilson was interested in being a Red Raider for the 2022-23 season, was practicing with the team, was getting some shout outs on the team accounts, what was heavily in contact with the coaching staff. And then you begin to get these mumblings that Devion Harmon is going to enter the program. Things get a little awkward there, and Mylik Wilson hits the portal a couple of days after Harmon's decision is announced. Now, obviously, correlation, causation, nobody can know for sure, but I do think that there's probably some reality behind this, and the fact that Mylik Wilson was probably on the outside looking in when it came to the guard rotation in terms of what Harmon can do, what Demarion Williams can do, and then even Pop Isaacs. It was just going to be difficult for him to assume a lot of those primary ball handling minutes if that's what he wanted to do with his next year of college eligibility. So, it sucks to say, but I get it. And I think the thing is too is that a lot of people will look at Mark Adams and say, uh, he's a defensive head coach. He's going to prioritize getting and retaining the best defensive talent that he can. And here's the thing with that, Mark Adams' system is so good that even when you have an elite level defender like Mylik Wilson, sometimes you have to trade defense for offense and just hope that your system can survive that. And like again, it sucks because Wilson is truly an elite level talent, but I think allowing the offense to kind of gain the recruiting upside and just hope that your defensive system does what it has proven to do. I think that's a really good strategy by Mark Adams. And that's coming from a guy that really didn't want to see Mylik Wilson go. I think it's a good coaching strategy and a good decision by Wilson.
yeah. I'm honestly conflicted about this, and I think that it's taken me a day or so to kind of just think it through because, on one hand, Wilson's defensive ability, like I mentioned earlier, that's something that you straight up won't be able to replace. Like, you look down the rest of the roster, and there's really only a couple of different aspects or traits that you could say are irreplaceable over the course of a season. Obviously, you look at Kevin O'Banner's three-point shooting from a big. It's going to be really hard to find that in the portal, and certainly you're going to someone that has that level of sort of experience as a stretch four. It's going to be hard to replace Bryson Williams' post ability from last year. it's going to be hard to sort of replicate Amac's ability to get rebounds and averaging over 13 a game in the last 2 seasons. Like, those are abilities that you can't just find every day in the portal. Mylik Wilson's defense is on that tier, if not better than some of those traits. And to be outright losing a guy like that, it's hard to overcome from you get in the sense that there is an aspect of your team that will undoubtedly be worse. And so you're looking at it from a trade-off standpoint. And like you, I think that on that front, it could be worthwhile. You certainly, by having Wilson go, you now have a guard rotation full of guys that have shown potential to be positive shooters. Obviously, you've got Devion Harmon, who has a lot of experience at a high major level, can kind of do it all for you. It's not like a Mac McClung situation where I feel like you're bringing in a guy who's a net liability on defense. So it's not going to be that big of a drop off. I mean, again, Mylik Wilson was an elite level defender. You're not going to get that with Devion Harmon, but what you could get is a guy that is a good defender that can provide so much value offensively that it's worthwhile. And then furthermore, it gives you more scholarship flexibility. Obviously, you can go out and attack more guys in the portal. You can sort of look at some of the wing deficiencies that you now kind of have because of not having TJ Shannon or Kevin McCullough coming back. So I think that at the end of the day, I really don't like having to play this sort of game with the roster because, I mean, Mylik Wilson's a guy that I want to see playing for Tech. And I think his game is a really, really intriguing case study in terms of how effective an elite level defender that's a net zero offense can end up, how useful he can be. And I mean, I enjoyed watching him play. So from a bias standpoint, it sucks to see him go. From a team building standpoint, I think there's an avenue where it could be the right move. I don't think that it's going to be something that we're going to know right away. And I feel like his level of defense is good enough that you have to say that it's going to be a trade-off one way or the other. But Mark Adams, we trust. This is not something that's new. I mean, you had something vaguely similar happen back in 2018 with Josh Webster leaving the program. And obviously there was some differences there. And Josh Webster, I would say, is not the player that Mylik Wilson is. But I think that flexibility worked out for you in the long run, even though, again, Webster was a player that was by all accounts entrenched in the program. And we'll have to see how it goes because it's too early to tell. But certainly I think Mylik is going to be a good addition to wherever he ends up next. I think Tech is going to utilize that extra scholarship to good use in the portal.
Yeah, and I think it's even personal bias aside, it's perfectly fair to be conflicted about this. Like, at the end of the day, this is an educated risk that Mark Adams is taking here. I don't think it's a gamble because the system has proven to be so good, but it's an educated risk. You're banking on the fact that you're going to need offense more than you'll need defense next season. And I agree with you. Like, it's hard to just stomach the fact that you're losing truly like a 95th percentile defender in college basketball. Like, that's not a guy that's easily let go of, especially the way that he kind of existed in the system and contributed towards it. But like, I think it is a risk that will pay off. And you're right, like, only time will tell, and it'll take a while, like probably till the end of next season before we know, like, hey, that was a good trade-off. Now, I don't think it's as simple as saying, Devion Harmon or Mylik Wilson. I don't think it comes down to that. I think it just comes down to, hey, how did your offense look? Did you need the extra playmakers? Did you need space for offensive players over defensive players? Did you need shot makers more than you needed defenders? I think those kind of questions will arise and be answered as the season goes on. But yeah, I mean, it's an educated risk for Mark Adams. I don't think it has like a very low floor. Like, it doesn't feel like a very high ceiling move. Like, retaining Mylik Wilson feels like a pretty high ceiling move because if he can turn into a good offensive player, then you've got an all Big 12 caliber guy on your team. But if Mylik Wilson remains who he is, then essentially you're using a scholarship spot on a guy that's going to be last in your rotation because he was last year, and it looks like the guard spot will be just as competitive this year. So yeah, kind of like a low ceiling, low floor move. I don't think there's a ton of payoff here from Mark Adams, but I do think it's a good way for him to do his best to prevent getting burned in a game where he just needs offense at the guard spot.
Yeah, I will say the only thing that's going to make this sting is if Tech doesn't make good use of the scholarship that they gain from this. Because, I mean, put it simply, you're now putting your cards on the table on being able to find at a minimum another guard or wing that can really sort of play in the rotation. We talked about this, I believe it was last week on an episode when we were talking about sort of if Kevin McCullough and TJ Shannon both decide to leave, does Tech still need to go after another guard? And the answer was a resounding yes. Now you take Mylik Wilson out of the equation, and obviously you add Devion Harmon back into it, which we didn't fully know at that point, even though it was pretty obvious. And now I think the answer still needs to be yes. So you still need to find another ball handler or wing that can at minimum be versatile and provide offensive value. And if you don't use that scholarship, if you use it on a project guy, someone that's not going to be in your rotation, then I think that sort of already brings the gamble towards a resounding no. Did it work out as the answer being no? Because, I mean, Mylik Wilson, someone you still have 2 years of eligibility left. It's not like he's going to be someone that you can't use following next year. And you brought him in with 3 years of eligibility remaining after his stint at Louisiana with the intention of him not being a one and done type of guy. So, I mean, this is closing the book on the Mylik Wilson era and a little bit earlier than expected. And so if you can't replace that this year, and obviously Tech has used that open scholarship in the past to get guys like Jalen Tyson in or get guys like Andre Saversov or Kevin McCullough, but it's an uncomfortable position to be in. And it's one of those things where, like, it's probably the first move I would say that Tech has made, or Mylik Wilson, obviously it was kind of a mutual decision, but it's the first time this offseason where I would genuinely say, like, I'd have to think a lot about how I would do my roster construction, because I do think that there's very much something to be said about how the ceiling is probably higher with Mylik Wilson on this team than otherwise. And so you're willingly kind of subtracting a little bit from your ceiling in the present with the hope that you can find someone better in the portal. And that's kind of the way the game has been this year. It's worked out for Tech in the past in the portal, but it's certainly a risk that is going to be taken. And it's one that you mentioned was kind of a high floor, low ceiling type of move. But I also think that in a way that if this backfires on you, you're not only lowering the floor, you're also lowering the ceiling. So we'll see. It's all going to come down to how Tech ends up using that scholarship spot and how the roster fits together next year. But regardless, it'll be fun to watch. It'll be entertaining. And I mean, beyond that, I also think it's going to be entertaining to see where Mylik Wilson ends up and how he ends up playing, because he's just a fun player to watch.
One way they could use that scholarship is on a 4-year double-digit scorer from the infamous Putnam Science Academy, Kyle Lofton, former St. Bonaventure 4-year perennial starter, has started 116 career games. Texas Tech is in contact. This feels like a move that I'm interested in watching. Emery, give me your thoughts in 1 minute or less.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lofton's a proven player that you're going to have. I mean, you want to talk about primary ball handler. He has 3 years worth of experience as basically being the guy that was a PBH at St. Bonaventure. Obviously, got a good physical body. But most importantly, I mean, he's from Putnam Science Academy. Is it really a Tech roster if you don't have at least one guy coming from there? And obviously, a little bit of a different mold than the past ones being projects. But certainly, I mean, I'm excited to see our good Connecticut friends being represented again, potentially.
Isn't Demarion Williams also a Putnam guy?
Oh, he is. I just remember that.
Man.
Yeah. So that'd be 2.
Let's keep the pipeline hot, though.
Yeah.
Let's keep it going. Come on.
I think we skipped a year or 2 there, so we might as well make up for it now.
That's right. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in to our discussion on the guard spot. I think that this Texas Tech roster is coming together in a very intriguing way, a lot of unknowns. But we will be here to break down every single move that happens. Be sure that you are subscribed to our feeds wherever you get podcasts, and that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. Follow Emery on Twitter at eraser41. Don't follow me right now, and don't follow me until Twitter support decides to do their job and help me out here.
Unless you want to look at crypto ads.
Yeah, if you want to buy some really fake NFTs and lose access to your account, then you should absolutely follow me on Twitter at rmainvillelbk. But you absolutely should subscribe to the at Locked On Texas Tech podcast Twitter account at Locked On TTU. No NFTs or any funny business there, just links to our most recent episodes, so you never miss it whenever we've got good content fresh on the feeds. Until our next episode, thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Big 12. Emory's on there all the time. Get all your daily Big 12 news in less than 30 minutes with Big 12 expert Josh Neighbors, good friend of the show. It's free and available on all platforms just like us. Thanks for listening.